All right, so control theory.
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of research papers here. And it looks like you're really interested in how this theory can explain behavior change.
Oh, yeah, very much so. It's a fascinating area.
I mean, at first glance, it seems kind of, like heady and academic.
Sure, it can seem that way.
But there's a lot of those aha moments, I think, in this material.
Definitely. Lots of those.
Once you start to unpack it.
Yeah. Control theory, or perceptual control theory as it's sometimes called, it really offers a completely different way of looking at why we do the things we do. It kind of challenges that traditional view that our behavior is just a reaction to the environment.
So it's not just like that stimulus response,
Right.
Pavlov's dog, bell rings, the dog drools.
Exactly. It's not that simple. Control theory suggests that we're not just passively reacting.
Yeah.
We're actively trying to control our perceptions.
Okay, so our perceptions, meaning how we experience the world.
That's it. How we experience the world, how we experience ourselves. And we're constantly adjusting our behavior to try and maintain those perceptions.
So I think I'm starting to get a feel for this.
Yeah.
But can you give us an example of how this works in real life?
Yeah, definitely. Imagine a tightrope walker.
Okay, yeah.
They're not just passively balancing, right?
Right.
They're actively controlling their perception of balance. Their brain is constantly comparing where they are to where they want to be.
So like that perfect, upright, balanced stance.
Yeah, that perfect upright stance and making these tiny adjustments with their muscles to stay on track.
So it's like they have this internal balance meter.
Right. Exactly.
That's constantly checking to see if they're on target.
Yes. And that balance meter is what control theory calls a negative feedback loop.
Okay.
It's a continuous process that involves a few key elements.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. What are these elements and how do they work together?
All right. So first, you have what's called the perceptual signal. That's what you're actually perceiving, like the tightrope walker's current sense of balance. Then you have the reference value. That's the desired state. Like for the tightrope walker, that would be staying upright.
Right.
And then there's the comparator, which is kind of like your brain's internal judge,
Okay.
constantly measuring the difference between where you are and where you want to be.
Got it. So if the tightrope walker starts to lean a little bit, their brain notices that difference between, like you said, their actual balance and that desired balance.
Exactly. And that's where the output comes in.
Okay.
The brain sends signals to the muscles to make adjustments, maybe shift their weight, change their posture.
To get them back in line.
Exactly, to bring that balance back to where it needs to be.
And all of this is happening automatically.
Right, without even thinking about it.
Wow.
It's like a thermostat, right? Adjusting the temperature in your house, you set the desired temperature.
Yeah.
And the thermostat is constantly comparing the actual room temperature to that setting, turning the heat on and off to maintain it.
This is making me think about all those times I've tried to change my behavior. Sticking to a diet, exercise plan, whatever it is. Like you're always kind of battling against yourself.
Yeah.
There's some part of you that just wants to stay the same.
That's such a good point. And control theory would suggest that those struggles, that's often because of conflicts between different control systems.
Okay.
It's like you have two internal thermostats and they're fighting for control.
Okay.
One set to eat healthy and the other one set to, eat all the cookies.
So it's not just about willpower then.
No, not just willpower.
It's more about understanding these underlying conflicts.
Yeah.
And then finding ways to resolve them.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because control theory gives us a framework for understanding how these conflicts come up, how they show up in our behavior, and how we can potentially resolve them.
Okay. I'm definitely hooked. But before we dive into those conflicts, let's just make sure we have a solid grasp of the basics here. So, am I understanding this right? Control theory suggests that a lot of our behavior change, it's not necessarily about learning new skills or habits.
Right.
It's more about adapting to these changes in our environment or to these internal conflicts.
That's a great summary.
Okay.
Think about it this way. If your house suddenly flooded, you wouldn't need to learn a new skill to change your behavior. You would just instinctively start moving things to higher ground.
Right. You would just react.
You'd be trying to protect yourself and your belongings.
Yeah.
And that's the same principle, really, for all sorts of situations. Control theory suggests we're constantly responding to these disturbances.
Disturbances meaning?
External disturbances and internal disturbances that disrupt our ability to control our perceptions.
So even little things, getting stuck in traffic or a disagreement with a friend, these can trigger these control systems.
Absolutely. And influence our behavior. And it's important to remember, this is mostly happening unconsciously. We're not always aware of these perceptions we're trying to control or the adjustments that we're making.
So we're kind of on autopilot a lot of the time,
In a way, yeah.
just reacting to things without really understanding why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But then how do we learn and grow?
Right. Yeah.
When do those aha moments happen that lead to lasting change?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how control theory explains learning and development. Essentially, learning is about modifying the elements of those feedback loops we were talking about.
So it's not just about adding new information or skills.
Right.
It's about changing the way our control systems operate.
You got it. For example, our perceptual functions, the way we take in and interpret information, that can become more refined through experience.
So like a, I don't know, like a wine connoisseur who can, you know,
Yes.
distinguish these subtle flavors that most people would never even notice.
Exactly. Or a musician who can hear a tiny change in pitch that's imperceptible to the untrained ear. And our reference values, those desired states, they can shift over time as well.
So someone who's recovering from an eating disorder, for example, might need to adjust their perception of what a normal portion size is.
Precisely. They're essentially resetting their internal thermostat for fullness. And even the effort that we're willing to put in, what control theory calls gain, that can change as well.
So someone who's really determined to reach a goal might be willing to go to greater lengths, push themselves harder
Right, exactly.
than someone who's less motivated.
Think about someone training for a marathon. They're willing to endure months of really grueling workouts
Yeah.
because their desire to complete that race, their reference value, is so strong.
Okay, yeah, this is starting to click for me. But I'm guessing it's not always this straightforward.
Right.
What happens when those control systems start to clash? When we have those competing goals or desires that are kind of pulling us in different directions?
That's where we get into the territory of conflict. And that's one of the most fascinating and important aspects of control theory.
All right, well, I'm ready for the next level then.
Yeah.
Let's unpack these conflicts and see how they play out in real life.
Let's do it. So, conflict, in the context of control theory, it happens when you have multiple control systems that are trying to control the same perception, but with different reference values.
Okay.
It's like having, two thermostats in the same room, each set to a different temperature. They're both going to be constantly battling for control,
Yeah.
leading to these fluctuations and discomfort.
It's not just like willpower, like we were saying. It's really like an internal struggle between these different parts of ourselves, each with their own goals,
Exactly.
priorities. Can you give us some real-world examples of how this might play out?
Definitely. Let's say you have a big deadline looming at work,
Okay.
but you also really want to spend time with your family. Right. You're trying to control your perception of both getting the job done and being a good parent. But those two goals might be in conflict.
Right.
Or think about someone who's trying to quit smoking.
Yeah.
They might have a strong desire to be healthy, but they're also battling against that urge to, relieve stress or anxiety with a cigarette.
Right. It creates that tension, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And sometimes, you just feel completely out of control.
Exactly.
So what happens when these conflicts come up? Like, how do they actually affect our behavior?
Well, conflict can show up in different ways. Sometimes it leads to what we call oscillating behavior.
Okay.
Think about that person trying to quit smoking. They might go back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
quit for a while, relapse, quit again,
Uh-huh.
caught in this cycle.
Forth.
Yeah. Indecision and struggle. Or it can lead to the suppression of one goal, where we
Okay.
kind of push down one of those conflicting desires.
So you try and, maintain control.
Right.
But doesn't that, I don't know, it feels like it would just create more pressure.
It does. It's like a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Right.
That's about to explode.
Exactly. And that's why suppression often leads to, outbursts later on,
Yeah.
breakdowns, all that pent-up frustration and energy has to go somewhere.
Okay, I come out.
It does. And in some cases, this conflict can even spiral into what we call those out-of-control spirals. Panic attacks, stress reaction, where it feels like your systems have just gone completely haywire.
This is all a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
It seems like these conflicts are kind of inevitable,
Yeah.
given, just the complexity of life,
Right.
all the competing demands that we face.
It's part of being human, I think.
So is there any way out? How do we actually resolve these conflicts and find some sense of peace?
That's where the concept of reorganization comes in. It's one of the most powerful and hopeful aspects of control theory. Reorganization is basically a trial and error process where our brains are trying to find a new balance,
Hmm.
a new way of organizing those control systems so that the conflicting goals can coexist a little bit more harmoniously.
So our brains are constantly like tinkering,
Yeah,
experimenting, trying to find a solution.
exactly. That's a great analogy. And what's interesting is that this reorganization process, it can sometimes look messy from the outside.
Okay.
You might engage in behaviors that seem random, even counterproductive,
Uh-huh.
but it's really your brain just trying to figure things out.
Makes sense. It makes me think about those times when I felt stuck. You try different approaches, but you
Yeah.
don't seem to be making any progress.
Right.
Maybe those were actually periods of reorganization.
It's very possible. And this brings us to another key element of control theory, which is awareness. Control theory suggests that we're only consciously aware of a small fraction of our control systems at any given time.
So it's like there's this whole hidden world of, inner processes that are shaping our behavior
Exactly.
without us even realizing it.
And that's why just becoming more aware of these processes can be so transformative.
Yeah.
By shining a light on those hidden control systems, we can start to understand what's driving our behavior and make more conscious choices.
So, knowledge is power. The more we understand about how our minds work, the more we can actually, create positive change.
Absolutely. That's the idea.
So if we want to actually harness this power of control theory, where do we start?
Well, one powerful tool is self-reflection.
Okay.
Just taking some time each day to observe your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, that can reveal a lot about the perceptions that you're trying to control.
Yeah.
And those reference values that are guiding your actions, you might ask yourself, like, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
What am I trying to achieve?
Yeah.
What's getting in the way? Just bringing that awareness can be really helpful.
It's like becoming a detective of your own mind,
Well,
right?
exactly.
Uncovering those clues.
Uncovering the clues, yeah. And mindfulness practices can be helpful for increasing awareness as well.
There's things like meditation.
Yeah, meditation, yoga, things like that. They can help us train our attention,
Right.
become more present. And that allows us to notice those subtle internal cues, those feelings of tension, those racing thoughts
Uh-huh.
that often signal a conflict or a disturbance.
Yeah.
So instead of just reacting on autopilot, you can pause, take a breath, and make a more conscious choice.
So you can, respond in a way that's more in line with what you want.
Exactly. And another powerful way to increase awareness is through open and honest conversations with others.
Oh, yeah?
Sometimes just talking to someone we trust, sharing our experiences, can help us see things from a new perspective.
Because sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're in your own head.
Absolutely.
But if someone can kind of reflect back to you what they're seeing, that can be really helpful.
It can be incredibly illuminating, yeah.
So once we've developed this awareness, what can we do with it? How do we actually resolve those conflicts? Create those more harmonious control systems?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's where control theory offers some pretty innovative and empowering approaches.
Okay, well, I'm all ears. Let's hear it.
One really promising approach is called method of levels therapy,
Method of levels.
or MOL.
MOL therapy. Yeah, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Remind me how that works.
So in MOL therapy, the therapist acts as a kind of guide, helping the client explore their experience in the present moment.
Okay.
The focus is on gently bringing awareness to the perceptions the client is trying to control and any conflicts that might be coming up.
So it's less about analyzing the past or like trying to directly change their thoughts.
Right.
It's more about just helping them be present.
It's about helping them tune into their own inner experience. Yeah, and what's really interesting is that just by becoming more aware of those underlying conflicts, people often find that they start to resolve themselves naturally.
Interesting.
It's like those conflicting control systems, once they're brought into the light of awareness, they can start to figure out a new way to coexist.
So they kind of work it out on their own?
In a way, yeah. It's tapping into that inherent wisdom of our own systems,
That's pretty cool.
trusting that they have the capacity to find solutions if we give them the space.
And that applies to other control theory interventions.
Absolutely. Whether it's a computerized problem-solving program like Milo or a group program like the Take Control course,
Right.
they're all designed to help people understand and use their own control systems.
This is all really empowering. It seems like control theory offers a very different way of thinking about behavior change.
It does. It really emphasizes collaboration.
Yeah.
self-discovery rather than force or willpower.
And it's not just limited to, individuals,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Organizations are starting to apply these principles too,
Okay.
to improve things like teamwork,
Yeah.
leadership, overall effectiveness.
So the idea is that by, creating a culture of shared goals,
Yes.
open communication,
Uh-huh.
you can reduce conflict and people can feel more ownership.
Exactly. That's the hope.
It sounds like a win-win. Do you have any examples of how this is being used in the real world, like real-life applications?
Yeah, there's a great case study from 1989 that shows how control theory can be used to improve performance in a manufacturing setting.
Okay, I'd love to hear about it.
So this particular manufacturing group, they were having trouble meeting deadlines.
Uh-huh.
Morale was low.
Yeah, makes sense.
So they implemented a control theory-based intervention that focused on helping team members understand their own goals,
Okay.
how those goals aligned with the organization's overall objectives. They also encouraged open dialogue to identify and address any conflicts that were popping up.
So it's less about top-down control,
Yeah,
more about, collaboration.
more about shared purpose, collaboration, exactly. And the results were pretty remarkable. The group went from meeting only 23% of their deadlines to meeting 95%.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. And not only did their performance improve, but their job satisfaction and their sense of teamwork went up too.
That's really impressive. It really shows the power of, aligning individual goals and organizational goals.
Yeah.
And control theory provides that framework.
It does.
But it also makes me wonder, if this theory is so powerful and effective, why isn't it more widely known and applied?
That's a great question. And there are a few reasons for that. One challenge is that control theory can be kind of counterintuitive.
Okay.
It asks us to shift our thinking away from that traditional stimulus response model to this more nuanced understanding of how internal perceptions drive behavior.
So we have to kind of unlearn some old assumptions.
Yeah, unlearn some old assumptions and embrace a new way of seeing things. And that can be tough. Another challenge is that control theory can be hard to study empirically. Remember, we're dealing with internal processes.
Right, right. So how do researchers even know if it's working?
Yeah, how do you measure those internal systems? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Researchers have developed some clever methods, like the test for the controlled variable. It involves introducing disturbances and seeing how people respond.
Okay.
But even with these tools, it can be tricky to really isolate and measure those subtle internal processes.
So it's hard to, prove it.
It's hard to prove definitively, yeah.
But it seems like control theory is gaining some momentum, though, especially in fields like psychology, education, even organizational development.
Definitely. More and more people are becoming aware of it and its potential.
So what do you think the future holds for control theory? Where do you see it going?
I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of what control theory can do. As more researchers and practitioners embrace these principles, I think we'll see even more creative applications. One area I'm particularly excited about is using technology to deliver these interventions.
Oh, interesting.
Like those chatbots we were talking about.
Yeah.
Technology offers amazing possibilities for personalizing interventions, making them more accessible, more engaging, and for tracking progress. We might even see virtual reality environments that let people practice controlling their perceptions in safe and controlled settings.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But it also raises some ethical questions, right?
Absolutely.
If we can influence people's perceptions and behaviors, how do we make sure this power is used responsibly?
That's a crucial question. It's something that researchers and practitioners in the field are actively discussing and working on. Like with any powerful tool, there's potential for misuse. But I'm optimistic. I think by being aware of these ethical concerns and having open discussions about the risks and benefits, we can really use this knowledge for good, to create a world where people feel more empowered, more fulfilled, and more connected.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into control theory.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's always fascinating to explore these ideas.
I feel like I have all these new tools for understanding myself and creating change in my own life.
That's great to hear.
If our listeners are interested in learning more, are there any resources you recommend?
Yeah, there are tons of great resources out there. Books, articles, websites, you name it. You can even find control theory-based coaching and therapy. It's a journey of self-discovery, and it can lead to some amazing insights and changes.
It sounds like it. Well, on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into control theory.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you found it valuable.
Yeah, we hope you learned something new.
and that you'll continue exploring this fascinating field.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep experimenting.
And keep striving to create the life you desire.
And remember, you are in control.